Ranch hand found a beaten native bride tied to a post, cut her free at dawn. The rope was old. That's what I noticed first. Not the woman, not right away. The rope was old and badly frayed near the knot, the kind of rope a man uses when he doesn't think the thing he's tying down is worth a good one. I'd come around the back corner of the Sutter barn before first light, because one of the mares had been kicking her stall all night, and I wanted to check her hock before the day got hot and complicated. I had a lantern in one hand, and the other hand was still damp from the water trough I'd splashed my face at on the way over. The air smelled like dust and old straw, and something else I couldn't name yet. She was on her knees behind the post, arms pulled back around it, wrists bound together. Her head was down, hair loose and tangled, and she wasn't making any sound at all. Not crying, not calling out. Just kneeling there in the gray pre-dawn with her hands tied to a hitching post like she was a piece of equipment somebody had stored and forgotten. I stood there longer than I should have. I'm not proud of that. Maybe 4 or 5 seconds. You see something like that and your mind goes flat for a moment, just flat and blank like it's refusing to process, and then it catches up all at once and you move. I set the lantern down on a fence rail and pulled my belt knife. She heard me coming. Her head came up fast and she flinched back hard against the post, shoulders braced, ready to take a hit. The way she flinched told me more about the last few days of her life than anything she could have said out loud. I held the knife up where she could see it, blade toward me. "The rope," I said, "just the rope." She looked at me for a long moment. Her right eye was swollen nearly shut. There was a cut along her cheekbone that had dried dark. She was maybe 22, 23, wearing a dress that wasn't hers, too big in the shoulders, wrong for the season, some white woman's cast-off somebody had put on her for reasons I didn't want to think about. She had the kind of stillness that comes from having already been through the worst of something. Not calm, not peace. Just the stillness on the other side of fear, where a person has already decided they'll take whatever comes next, and there isn't much more to take from them. She didn't nod, but she stopped bracing. I went around behind the post and cut the rope. It took 2 passes. That old frayed hemp was wound tight and had dried stiff in the cold. When it fell away, she didn't move her arms immediately. They'd been held back so long she had to think about it. I watched her bring them forward slowly, carefully, the way you move a thing that's been hurt and you're not sure if it's still attached right. I came back around front and crouched down to her level. Her wrists were raw. One of them was worse than raw. There was a dark ring around it where the rope had bit through to something. "Can you stand?" I said. She got up without answering me. She got up on her own, which told me something too. She swayed once. I put a hand out but didn't touch her, just held it there in case. She steadied herself and stood straight and looked at me, and her one good eye was very dark and very steady and not grateful. Not yet. Not asking anything. Just watching to see what I would do next. I picked up the lantern. "I got a bunk room," I said. "Small, nobody in it but me. You can sit down in there." She followed me. My name is Elias Cook. I say that now because I never said it to her right away, and it matters, a little, to the shape of things. I'd worked the Sutter spread for going on 11 years by then. Came up from Texas as a young man with $40 and a horse that wasn't fully mine, took the first work I could find, and never quite left. The Sutter family, old man Henry Sutter, then his son Dale when Henry's heart gave out, were fair enough employers if you kept your head down and your work clean. I was good at both. I was 47 that spring. Not old, not young. The kind of age where you stop counting and just measure yourself by what you can still do in a day, which was plenty. I could run fence from first light to last. I could read a horse's mood from 30 yards and tell you which leg was bothering it. I could fix a windmill in the dark by feel if I had to, which I had once in a January storm, and it had taken most of the night, but the Sutters had water in the morning. I wasn't a complicated man, and I hadn't lived a complicated life. I just lived a long, quiet one mostly, with patches of hard in it the way any ranch life has hard in it, and I'd come through those patches the way I came through everything, by working and not making noise about it. I had no wife. I'd been close once, a woman named Celia in a town I'd passed through when I was 33, but she'd made the sensible choice and married a man with property, and I hadn't blamed her. I'd thought about it for a while, not bitterly, just honestly, and then I'd stopped thinking about it. You get used to your life the way it is. The spaces in it become just the shape of your life, not wounds. The outline of something that isn't there, but the outline is familiar and you stop noticing it most days. Some nights you notice it. The bunk room was attached to the northeast corner of the main barn, about 12 feet by 10. I had a cot, a three-legged stool, a small iron stove, a shelf with a few things on it, and a window I kept clean because I liked looking out at the hills in the morning. It was enough. Everything in it was old and used and worked fine. I put her on the stool and crouched at the stove and got a fire going. She sat with her back straight and her hands in her lap and watched me, didn't say anything. I didn't push it. When I had water heating, I found a piece of clean rag. I kept them for horsework, and I cleaned the cut on her cheek and the wrists as well as I could. She held still for it, didn't wince. I worked carefully and didn't hurry, and when I was done I sat back on my heels and looked at my work, and it wasn't good enough, but it was better. "Do you want food?" I said. "Yes," she said. First word. Her voice was low and even, and she said it plainly like a fact, and I liked that about it. I had biscuits left from the night before and some dried beef, and I put them in front of her on the shelf board. She ate slowly and deliberately, not like a person starving but like a person being careful with herself. I drank coffee and watched the stove and let her eat. After a while she said, "You work here." 11 years, I said. "You know the man who owns it?" "Dale Sutter, yeah." A pause. "He knows about the post." She said it without heat, just a fact she was placing on the table between us. I looked at her then. She was looking at the stove. The swollen eye had gone purpler in the lantern light. The cheek was bad. Dale Sutter was 31 years old and ran a spread of 800 acres and thought quite a lot of himself. He had a habit of making arrangements with men in the valley, and he had a habit of not seeing through those arrangements when they proved inconvenient. I'd watched him do it with a horse trader the prior fall, and I'd watched him do it with a man who'd brought cattle up from the south, and both times the other man had walked away with less than he'd come with, and Dale had looked satisfied about it. I'd filed those things away and said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my business. You do that. You tell yourself it isn't your business, the things other men do, and most of the time that's true enough. Most of the time there isn't a direct harm that requires a direct answer. You work your work and you tend your corner and you let the world handle itself. But there are lines. "I know him," I said. "Yeah." She looked at me then, waiting to see what I'd do with that. "Nobody put you on that post but Dale Sutter," I said. "Or somebody Dale Sutter told too." She was quiet a moment. Then, "The man he bought the arrangement from, he had a gun. Dale told him there would be trouble if he came back for me. The man left." I thought about that. There was a kind of transaction in what she was describing that turned something cold in my stomach. "What's your name?" I said. She told me. Mara. She'd had a Shoshone name before, her mother's name for her, but she'd been at a mission school for 4 years and they'd called her Mara there, and it had stuck between the two worlds she'd lived in. "Elia's cook," I said. "I work the horses and the fence line mostly, and whatever else comes up." She nodded like she was filing that away too. "What happens now?" she said. "Now," I said, "you sleep on the cot. I'll take the floor. In the morning we'll see." She didn't argue. She lay down on the cot with her back straight and her hands folded, and she was asleep in maybe 3 minutes, which told me she hadn't slept in at least a day, probably more. I stretched out on the floorboards with my saddle blanket and lay there a while listening to the horses shift in their stalls, and watching the gray light come up through the window. I didn't sleep. I was thinking about Dale Sutter, and about what I was going to say to him in the morning, and about what would likely happen after I said it. He found us about an hour after sunup. I'd been at the corral checking the mare's hock. It was just a soft swelling, not serious, would clear on its own in a few days, when I heard the main house door bang open. I knew his walk. Heavy heels, didn't lift his feet enough. He came around the corner of the barn and stopped when he saw me. "Cook," he said. "Dale," I said. "You find something last night that wasn't yours to find." I straightened up from the mare's leg. I'm not a tall man, but I'm put together solid, which 11 years of ranch work will do, and I took a moment to just look at him. He was big, Dale was. 2 inches taller than me and broader through the chest, and he had the look on his face he wore when he thought a thing was going to go a particular way, and he was just waiting on it. "There was a woman tied to your hitching post," I said. "I cut her loose." "That woman," Dale said, "is a matter between me and the man she came with. It's a business question and it's got nothing to do with you." "What kind of business," I said, "ties a woman to a post?" Dale looked at me a long, quiet second. Then his jaw set. "The kind that's mine, not yours. I want her back at that post until I sort this out. Man I dealt with went back on a promise and I'm holding the collateral until he makes it right." I looked at him. He looked at me. "No," I said. The word came out easy. Not angry, just plain. Just the flat fact of it, like stating the weather. Dale blinked. I don't think he'd heard that word from me in 11 years, and he wasn't sure what to do with it. "Cook." "She's not collateral," I said. "She's a person, you know that. And you tied her to a post in the cold with her hands behind her back and her face looking the way her face looks. That's done. It's not going to go further." His face went red. "You're telling me on my own land." "I'm telling you," I said. "Yeah." He took a step toward me. I didn't move. Not back, not forward, just stood. The thing about confrontations like that is they run on what a man believes about the other man. Dale Sutter believed he was bigger than me and that I was a hired hand who'd been quiet for 11 years and didn't have anything to back up what he was saying. He was right that I was a hired hand. He was right that I'd been quiet. He just made a mistake about what the quiet meant. He'd thought it meant I didn't have anything in me worth worrying about. Quiet is never that, if you look at it right. Quiet is mostly just a man who decided a long time ago he'd save what he had for when it was actually needed. We stood there. The mare behind me shifted and blew through her nose. I said, "Go inside, Dale." And something in the way I said it, some tone I wasn't performing, just had made him stop. He stood there with his face still red and his hands working at his sides, and I could see him thinking about what pushing this would actually cost him, and the math wasn't going his way. He said something under his breath that I didn't quite catch, and turned, and went inside. I stood at the corral a minute longer. The sun was up fully now. The valley smelled like warming grass and old fence wood. I picked up my gloves from the rail and went back to the bunk room. Mara was awake. She'd heard it, the walls weren't thick, and she was sitting on the edge of the cot with both feet on the floor and her eyes careful. "He'll fire you," she said. "Probably," I said. "You've been here 11 years. "Yeah." She looked at me. I could see her working through something, running some calculation. She was a smart woman, it showed in her eyes, in the way she put things together and didn't waste words on them. After a moment she said, "Why?" "Why what?" "Why do that? You don't know me." I thought about how to answer that. I'm not a man who explains himself much. I work and I act, and the reasons are usually just underneath the surface if somebody cares to look. But she'd asked it straight, and she deserved a straight answer. "Because it was wrong," I said. "What was done to you, and I could stop it from going further. That's the whole of it." She held my eyes for a long moment. Not like she was testing me, more like she was reading something. checking it against something she already knew about men and their reasons. Then she nodded once and looked away. "I'll go," she said. "I don't want to cost you more." "Where?" I said. That stopped her. "Where would you go?" I said. Not hard, not pushing, just the actual question. She didn't have an answer for that. I could see it on her face, the brief search, the empty result. Her people were Shoshone, she'd told me, from a band that had been pushed off the land 3 winters back. She'd been at the mission school, then she'd been arranged for, it sounded like, and whatever had been home before that was gone or scattered. People she'd known were spread across territory she had no map for. You can't go back to a place that's been pulled apart. That's not sentiment, just geography. "I don't know," she said finally. "Then sit," I said. "Let me think." Dale Sutter fired me before noon. He came out to the barn and did it formally, which I respected in a cold way. He said my name and his, and stated that my employment was done as of that day, and that I should clear my things from the bunk room by sundown. I told him I'd need until morning on account of the woman needing the cot, and he looked like he might argue that, and then he looked at my face again and said morning was fine and went back inside. He didn't ask about references or offer a parting handshake or anything like that. Just said it and walked away. 11 years. I'd known it was coming from the moment I'd said no at the corral. I'm not saying that changes what it felt like. There's a difference between knowing a thing and the actual moment of it landing. But I'd made the calculation, and I'd made it while I was making the choice, and I didn't regret it. I had a little money. Not much, I'd never needed much, but I'd put aside about $230 over the years in a tin I kept under the stove, and I counted it that afternoon while Mara sat on the stool and braided her hair back off her face. Enough to move on something if I moved carefully. There was a piece of land about 8 miles north that I'd ridden past for years. Small spread, maybe 40 acres, with a creek running the lower third and a house on it that had been empty for going on 3 seasons. The man who'd owned it, Old Parks, had died and left it to a nephew in Denver who had no interest in farming and who'd been trying to sell it for 2 years without success, because there was a lien on it from a debt Parks had owed before he died, and the whole thing was tangled in title questions that put off buyers. I knew about the lien because I knew about most things in that valley if I kept my ears open and my mouth closed, which I did. I also knew what the lien amount was approximately, because the Denver nephew had complained about it to the land office, and the land office clerk, a man named Ferris who drank too much in the evenings and talked, had mentioned it once at the feed store. $210, give or take. The nephew wanted more than that for the land itself, but a man who's been trying to unload a problem for 2 years has a different kind of wanting than a man who's never been tried. 230 might be enough to cover the lien and talk the nephew into something workable on the remainder. I sat with that thought for a while. Then I looked at Mara, who was watching me think, who had said nothing since morning and was just sitting there steady and quiet with her braided hair and her careful eyes, and I said, "There's a piece of land north of here. I've got enough to put toward the lien if the nephew will deal. House needs work. The creek is good. 40 acres is workable if you're not too proud to start small." She looked at me. "I'm saying," I said carefully, "that I'm going. And if you've got nowhere else you could come, I'd give you the house. I can sleep in a barn or an outbuilding fine. I've done it before and it doesn't bother me. You'd have a roof and I wouldn't crowd you. I'd just work the land and you'd have space, time, to figure the rest." The quiet stretched out. "You'd give me the house," she said. "It's right. And sleep in the barn." "I've done it before," I said again. She looked at me for a long time. The swollen eye was still bad, but she could open it more now, and both eyes on me was something I felt. "I'll earn my place," she said finally. "I'm not a thing to be kept." "I know that," I said. "I can work, cook, tend a garden, help with fencing. I know plants, medicines, useful things. I know what grows by creek water and what it's good for." I believe you, I said. I'm saying I'll be useful, not a charity. I know that too, I said. I didn't offer charity, I offered a start. There's a difference. She looked at me another moment. Then she said, all right. We left at first light. The Denver nephew. His name was Aldous Parks, and he was a soft-handed man who'd made his life in the city and thought of land as an abstraction you converted to money when you could. Listened to my proposal over a letter I wrote to his office. Ferris, the land clerk, helped me word it in the right way, which is to say in the way that made it plain to a city man that the alternative to my offer was probably another 2 years of nothing. Aldous wrote back inside 3 weeks and agreed to sign the property over for $210 applied to the lien, with a 5-year lien payment arrangement on the remainder, which amounted to about $40 a year and was manageable if the land did what I thought it could do. I signed it. I don't know that he understood he'd been reasonable. I think he just wanted the thing off his books. The house was a mess. 2 windows broken out, 1 wall section where the logs had settled wrong and let the wind through the gap, the porch rail rotted clean off, the stovepipe needing new jointing where it went through the roof. The stove itself worked and the roof was sound, which were the 2 things that mattered most, and the rest was labor, which was a thing I had. We fixed it together. Mara and I. She was stronger than she looked, not just physically, though she was capable and had real stamina, but in the way she approached a problem. Straight at it, no circling, no complaint. She figured out the settled wall before I did by running her hand along the logs until she found the place where the chinking had failed, and she was right. And we mixed new chinking that afternoon and packed it in, and the draft stopped by evening. She didn't make a thing of being right about it. She just moved on to the next problem. She took the bedroom. I took the loft above the small outbuilding I converted into a proper bunkhouse space, where I put a rope cot and hung my things on pegs and was comfortable enough. I've slept in worse places. Most of my life, I'd slept in places that were more about function than comfort, and I'd made my peace with that a long time back. We didn't talk a lot those first weeks. We worked and we ate, and occasionally one of us would say something necessary about the land or the repairs or what needed doing tomorrow, and that was about it. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was just careful. 2 people being careful with each other, which is the right thing to do when you don't know someone yet, and when there's been enough of the wrong kind of carelessness already. I noticed things, though. I couldn't help it. The way she moved through the mornings, purposeful and quiet, up before me always, already at something when I came out. The way she looked at the creek, standing at the bank in the early light with her arms at her sides and her chin slightly raised, like she was taking stock of it the way you take stock of an animal to see if it's trustworthy. The plants she started gathering along the water. She knew names for things I had no names for, and she dried them in bundles and hung them from the porch eave, and the smell of them in the evening was something I didn't have a word for. Green and dry at once. Like the land itself was in the room with you. She didn't talk about her life before, and I didn't ask. There were things in her that were none of my business, and I knew it, and the way I showed I knew it was by not going near them. You can respect what a person doesn't offer by just leaving it alone. That might be the only real respect there is. Toward the end of the second week, she brought me something to drink one evening when I was sitting on the porch after supper. A tea she'd made from something she'd gathered by the creek. She set it beside me without ceremony and then sat down on the porch step herself, which was new. She'd always gone inside before, and we sat there in the cooling evening without talking, and the quiet was different from the working quiet we'd had all day. Softer, less careful. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. "What did you expect?" I said. She thought about it, not performing the thinking, actually sitting with it. A man who'd want something back. Men who do a thing like what you did, they usually want something back. Even when they don't say so. "Nothing to want back," I said. "You're building something here, I can see that already. You don't owe me anything." She turned and looked at me in the side-on evening light. The eye had healed, both eyes on me now, and that direct, reading look. Why does that not bother you? She said. I've got the land, I said. I've got work I know how to do. That's more than I had a month ago. You being here doesn't take anything from me. She turned back to the hills. The light was going gold and long across the valley, and the creek was making its sound in the distance. My mother's name for me was Naya, she said. It means something like the air just before rain. She said when I was born there was a storm coming and she could smell it on the wind, and when I came, she named me for that smell. I didn't say anything right away, just sat with it. Is that what you want to be called? I said eventually. No, she said. Myra is fine. I've worn it long enough it fits like an old coat. A pause. I just wanted you to know it, the other one. Naya, I said. Yes. We sat a while longer after that, until the dark came on full. There's a man in the valley named Corliss Tyne. Runs about 400 acres east of the creek road, beef cattle mostly, and fancies himself the kind of man whose opinion carries weight because his acreage does. He came riding out to the property about 6 weeks after we arrived, him and 2 of his hands, and he sat on his horse at the property line and looked at the house and looked at Mara, who was at the garden plot. She'd started staking out along the south side of the house, and then looked at me. Cook, he said, heard you left Sutter's. That's right, I said. Bought Old Park's place. Cleared the lien and came to an arrangement with the estate. Yeah. He looked again at Mara. She didn't look up from her work. She knew he was there, I could tell by the slight stilling of her hands, but she didn't look up. She had a stake in her hand, and she was using it to mark out the corner of the plot, and she just kept working, slow and deliberate, like men on horses, were a thing she was used to ignoring because they usually weren't worth the attention. That an Indian woman, Tyne said. That's Mara, I said. She lives here. Tyne's mouth worked a little. His horse shifted under him. Dale Sutter had something to say about what happened at his place. Woman, a post, you getting in between a business arrangement. Dale Sutter had a woman tied to a post, I said. I cut her loose. That's what happened at his place. If he told you it differently, he told you wrong. One of Tyne's hands shifted his horse. I noted it without looking directly at it. Valley's got a certain way of doing things, Tyne said. Certain expectations about how things are set up, what's normal. It does, I said. And I know the valley well enough to know what those expectations are, and which ones I'll hold to and which ones I won't. She works this land and she lives in that house, and that's not going to change because Dale Sutter's uncomfortable about what he did or because you've got an idea about how things are supposed to look. Tyne looked at me for a long, steady while. He was trying to read me the way Dale had tried to read me, and he was coming to the same answer Dale had come to, which was that the quiet in me wasn't weakness, and the years hadn't made me soft in any of the ways that mattered. You're going to make it hard on yourself, Tyne said finally. Valley doesn't forget. Valley can think what it wants, I said. This land is lawfully purchased and she's lawfully on it, and I'll defend both of those facts as long as I need to. You want to take that to the land office or to the law, I'm ready. You want to bring men out here, I'm ready for that too. I'd rather not, but I'm ready. Another long silence. The 2 hands behind Tyne were looking at each other in the way men look at each other when they're recalculating what they signed up for. Your business, Tyne said finally, not gracious, just done. He wheeled his horse and left. His hands went with him. I went back to the fence I'd been mending. After a few minutes, Mara came over and stood near me. She didn't say anything right away. She just stood there watching me work, the stake still in her hand, and then she said quietly, "Thank you." "Don't," I said. "Don't thank you. Don't feel like you needed me to fight for you," I said. "I did it because it was right and because it's my land too and I won't be told how to run it, not because you can't handle yourself." She was quiet for a moment. "I know the difference," she said. "That's why I said it." I kept working the fence. She went back to her staking. The afternoon was warm and the creek was running clear, and a hawk turned slow circles over the south pasture. The summer came on hard and dry, and we worked through it. The creek held better than I'd feared. There was something about the way the land channeled the snowmelt from the hills north of us that kept the lower third of the property green, even when the grass on the upper sections went brown and brittle. Mara had noticed it before I did. She'd walked the creek bank 3 times in the first week we arrived, pacing it out, and she'd told me where the seep was that was feeding it from below, which I hadn't known to look for. I put 6 head of cattle on the lower pasture in July, bought cheap from a man selling up and moving to Oregon. Thin cattle, but sound, and the grass was good enough to put weight on them by fall if we managed it right. Mara's garden came in better than I'd expected. She knew things about planting I didn't: companion plants, timing, the angles of the sun relative to the house, the way certain plants will shade and protect the ones next to them if you put them right. By August, we were eating from the garden most meals and preserving what was coming in faster than we could use it, and the pantry in the house was filling up in a way that made the winter seem manageable. She was good with the cattle too. Better than she'd let on at first. She could read an animal's mood from 30 yards, and she had a steadiness around them that they responded to. I started relying on her for the afternoon checks without really deciding to. It just became the way things went, because she was good at it and I was good at other things, and there was no reason to double up when the work was already getting done. We were talking more. Natural talking, not the careful kind. She'd say things about the plants she'd gathered, where she'd found them, what they were good for. I'd tell her what I knew about the land and the cattle, and the way the weather moved through the valley in different seasons. We'd talk about the repairs that still needed doing, the fences, the outbuilding roof. Sometimes we'd talk about things that didn't have anything to do with the land at all. She'd read more books than I had. 4 years at that mission school, and she'd read everything they had and remembered most of it, and she had opinions about things I hadn't thought to form opinions about, and she said those opinions plainly and without softening them for me, which was, it was something. I hadn't had many conversations in my life where the other person wasn't giving me the version they thought I wanted. She just said what she thought. I was careful through all of it not to let what I was feeling show. It was there, it had been there, quietly for a while. The particular way I noticed when she was close. The way her voice had become the sound I listened for in the mornings before I was fully awake. The way I'd find myself noticing small things. The angle of her shoulders when she was concentrating. The particular way she laughed, which was rare and brief and real. But she'd had enough men deciding what they wanted from her without her say in it, and I wasn't going to be another one of those. Whatever I was feeling was mine to manage, and I managed it, and I told myself that was fine. The land was good. The work was real. The thing we'd built here in a few months was more than most men built in a decade, and I'd have been a fool to risk it by making something of what I felt when I didn't know what she felt. You get good at that over the years, carrying things quiet. In September, Corliss Tyne sent word through a neighbor that there was a meeting in town. A Valley Association meeting was the polite name for it. They met twice a year usually, to talk water rights and fence disputes and the normal business of men who share a watershed. But I'd heard what was on the agenda this time through Ferris, who heard everything. I rode into town because I wasn't going to pretend I hadn't heard. The meeting was at the back room of Hatch's feed store. 8 men, which was most of the landholders in the valley. Tyne was there. Dale Sutter was there too, in the back looking at his boots. I came in and took a seat and waited. The talking was general at first. Water rights, fence disputes, the coming winter, whether the pass road would get any maintenance before the snow. The usual. Then Tyne got to it. There's a situation on the park's land, he said. Bought by Elia's cook, who most of you know, and he's got set up house with a native woman, Shoshone from what I gather, and I think we ought to discuss. What's the concern? I said. Tyne looked at me. Valley's a community cook. There are standards, ways things are done. The woman's situation, her presence on the land, the nature of your arrangement, it's irregular. It reflects on the valley as a whole. Name the standard, I said. Say the specific thing you're objecting to. He didn't like being pinned that way. His mouth worked. The arrangement. What arrangement? I said. She lives on land I purchased lawfully. She works it. She's grown food on it. She's tended livestock on it. She's done no harm to a single man in this room or in this valley. You want to name a standard, name one that applies to something she's actually done. Not what she is, what she's done. Silence in the room. I let it sit a moment. Dale, I said, turning, you want to tell these men what you did, because that's what started this. Tell it plain. Dale Sutter's face went through about 4 expressions in 3 seconds. He settled on something that was trying to be dignity and was mostly shame. He didn't say anything. There was a woman tied to a post on his property, I said to the room, hands bound behind her, in the cold, with her face in the state it was in because somebody had put it there. I cut her loose. That woman is Mara. She now lives on land I bought lawfully, and she works it, and she's done nothing to any man in this valley except exist on it. Any man here who's got an objection to that, an objection that isn't just the color of her skin or the convenience of Dale Sutter, I'll hear it. Nobody spoke. Walt Gruber, who ran a small outfit near the North Ridge and who I'd always thought was a decent man under the bluster, Walt said quietly, seems settled to me. She's on lawful land. Cook does right by his property. I don't see the business. A few nods around the room. Not enthusiasm. Just the quiet subsidence of men who'd been told plainly that they didn't have a case and knew it, and who were relieved to let it go without having to admit they'd been about to do something they'd feel bad about later. Tyne looked around the room, found no allies showing themselves, and said, "Fine, other business." I rode home in the dark. The stars were thick, that deep autumn thickness you get when the air is finally dry and clear. The air had the first real cold edge in it. My horse knew the road, and I let her take it at her own pace, and I sat in the saddle and looked up at the stars and thought about Mara. When I came in, the lamp was still lit in the house. She was at the table. She'd been writing in that small notebook she kept. I'd never asked what she put in it, and she'd never said, and she looked up when I came in. The lamp was behind her, and it made a halo of the loose hair around her face, and I stood in the doorway a moment longer than I needed to. "Late," she said. "Town," I said. "There was a meeting." Something passed across her face. "About us. About the land. And you, Dale Sutter and Tyne trying to make something of it." She set the notebook down, waited. "It's fine," I said. I said what needed saying. They've got no case and no real stomach for it when you name it out loud in front of everyone. She looked at me for a long time. In the lamplight, the angles of her face were clear and still. The room was small. I was aware of the small room and the yellow light, and the fact that I'd just spent an hour in front of 8 men saying what I'd said, and I was standing here now and she was looking at me. "You went in there for me," she said. "I went in there for what's right," I said. "Elia's just my name." Soft and flat, like she was setting it down somewhere careful. I stood there. "You go in front of men with land and history in this valley," she said, "and you say what you said, and I'm supposed to believe it's just right and wrong, just the principle of it." "It is," I said. "Maybe," she said, "maybe it's also something else." The quiet in the room was different from the other quiets we'd had. It had weight in it. It had the particular texture of something that had been waiting a long time to be said. "I haven't said anything," I said finally, "and I wasn't going to unless you wanted me to. I wasn't, that's not what I was trying to build here. I wasn't angling toward anything. I just wanted the thing we made here to be good and real, and I wasn't going to ruin it by." "Elia's," she said again, "the same way." I stopped. "I know what you were doing," she said. I know why you were careful. I know you were protecting me from having to say no. A pause. You don't have to protect me from that anymore. She stood up from the table. She came across the room, not fast, not closing distance in a rush, just walking toward me the way you walk toward something you've already decided about, and she put her hand on my chest, flat-palmed, right at the center. I didn't move. I'm deciding, she said. You've been careful and decent and you've done everything right, and now I'm deciding. This is mine to do. I put my hand over hers, just that. The lamp threw our shadows big on the wall behind us, and outside the creek made its sound over the rocks, and the night was very still. All right, I said. She looked up at me. Both eyes, steady and direct and warm, not the wariness of the first morning, not the careful watching of the early weeks, just her, just plain, just looking at me and seeing me and having decided. All right, she said back. That was the shape of it, that was how it went. I'm not going to put pretty words around what came after, because pretty words aren't how any of it felt. It felt like something I hadn't known I was waiting for, and then it was just there. Real and solid and daily. She was a direct woman, clear about what she wanted, clear about what she didn't, not given to softness for its own sake. And when she was easy with me, there was a warmth in it that was specific to me. Something I could feel was mine, not given out of obligation or habit or the absence of other options, but chosen, over and over, in the small daily ways that are the only ways that mean anything real. You spend a long time learning to be useful and solid and not expect much back. You get the work done and you stay steady and you keep your own counsel and you tell yourself that's a full life, and in a lot of ways it is. But there's a thing that's missing that you don't quite have the name for until it's not missing anymore. We married in the spring. There was no ceremony worth calling much of one, a man in the next town who had the legal standing to do it, a brief and plain thing, 2 witnesses who were Ferris, the land clerk, and his wife. Mara wore her own clothes, not somebody's cast-off. I wore a clean shirt. That was all. She held my hand during it and she looked at me instead of the man doing the talking, and I looked at her, and that was more than I'd ever thought I'd have, and it was enough. Tyne came by the property about a month after with his hat in his hands, literally, in his hands, which was a thing I hadn't expected from him, and said something approximate to an apology that was really more of an acknowledgement that he'd been on the wrong side of something and knew it now. I accepted it without fanfare. A man who can admit he was wrong is worth more than a man who was right to begin with and won't let you forget it. Dale Sutter never came. I didn't miss him. By the fall we had 12 head of cattle and a garden that had paid back more than it cost us, and a fence line solid all the way to the creek road. I'd rebuilt the outbuilding right and added a small lean-to for the tools. Mara had planted 2 apple trees along the south side of the house, young things, barely up to my waist, whippy little trees that looked like they were still figuring out how to be trees, and she said they'd give fruit in 3 years if we were lucky and 5 if we weren't. I told her I'd take 5. 5 was fine. She'd started seeing to some of the neighbors, too. The plants she gathered and dried. There were people in the valley who'd started coming to her when someone was sick or hurt, quietly, without making a production of it. A woman on the next spread over had a bad chest cough all winter and Mara made something for it, and it cleared up by spring. Walt Gruber's youngest boy cut his arm badly on a fence wire, and Walt brought him over and Mara cleaned and packed it, and he didn't lose the arm, which a doctor in town had said was possible. Walt didn't say much about any of it. He wasn't a man who made speeches. But the next time he rode by he left a side of smoked pork hanging on our fence post and kept going, and that was Walt's version of saying something. The valley came around the way valleys do, not all at once, not with any declaration. Just slowly, in the way that people revise their opinions when the evidence keeps being contrary to what they thought. She was on the land. She worked it honestly. She helped when help was needed, and she asked for nothing she didn't earn. They couldn't argue with it. Most of them stopped trying. I'm sitting on the porch as I tell you this. Evening. The first cold in the air, but nothing hard yet. The killing cold is still a month off, maybe more. The hills across the creek have gone amber and rust the way they do when the season turns, and if you're quiet you can hear the water from here. Mara's inside. I can hear her moving, that particular footstep I know, that specific rhythm that's hers and no one else's. The lamp's lit in there, and the light comes out through the window, and lies yellow on the porch boards by my feet. There's a picture I keep in my head that isn't from any one moment. It's from all of them layered together. Her at the creek bank in the early light with her arms at her sides, reading the water like a message. Her hand on my chest in the lamplight, flat-palmed, making a decision she'd already made. Her telling me her mother's name for her, Naya, the air before rain, and setting it down between us like something she was trusting me with. I cut a rope in the dark, and a woman stood up on her own. That was the beginning of it. And what came after wasn't anything I engineered or arranged or planned for. It was just what happened when two people work the same ground long enough, and are honest with each other, and let things be what they actually are. Door opened just now. She came out onto the porch and set a coffee cup beside me without being asked about it, because she knows when I want coffee in the evening, and she just knows it. The way you know the small permanent facts about a person when you've been paying attention. She stood next to my chair and put her hand on my shoulder, that solid, warm, particular hand, and she looked at the hills for a moment with that look she has, the one that takes the full measure of a thing before she decides about it. Then she squeezed my shoulder once and went back inside. That hand. That's the thing I'd have told you I wasn't looking for, the thing I'd have said wasn't in the cards, the thing I'd learned to live without well enough that I'd convinced myself the without was fine. A woman who chose, clear-eyed and deliberate, knowing exactly what she was looking at. Not out of need or debt or the absence of other options. She was too honest for any of that, and I knew it, and that's exactly what made it mean what it meant. The two apple trees are against the south wall, settling in for the winter. Little things still, but the roots are in. I plan to be here when they give fruit. I plan to be here a long time after that. We both do. There are things I think about, now that I have time to think, and time is something I have, not because the work is less, but because the days feel different when you're not just working through them alone. When there's somebody on the other side of the table. When the lamp in the window means something other than just that you left a lamp on. I think about old Parks sometimes, the man who owned this land before the nephew got it. I never knew him well, passed him on the road a few times, nodded. He died alone in this house, from what Ferris told me. The land sat empty for 3 seasons because nobody could figure out what it was worth or who had the right to it. And then the lien came free, and a broke ranch hand with $230 in a tin can said he'd take it. And now there are 2 people living here who turned a broken-down mess of a property into something that works, and apple trees going in along the south wall, and a woman who knows the name of every plant along the creek and what it's good for. Strange how things find their shape. Strange how a rope left fraying around a hitching post in the dark can be the beginning of a life. I wouldn't have said that's what it was, standing there with my belt knife in the lamplight. I wasn't thinking about shape or beginning or any of it. I was thinking about a rope and a woman on her knees and the thing that was plainly wrong and needed to be made right. That's all it was, at the start. Just a man who saw something wrong and had the tool to fix it. But that's usually how the things that matter begin. Not with a plan. Just with a person doing the plain right thing in a plain moment and then finding out what's on the other side of it. She's making something in the kitchen. I can smell it, something with the dried plants from the Eve bundles, something warm and green. The horses are settled in the small barn I put together in August. The cattle are down in the creek pasture. The fence line is solid. The apple trees are against the south wall. All of it ours,